Washington Journal continues.
Representative Shaka Fattah is joining us this morning to talk about what's next for congressional Democrats. I want to begin with the leadership vote that is going to be happening on Wednesday for House Democrats. And Representative Heath Shuler has decided that he's going to challenge Nancy Pelosi for that minority leader spot. And he has said this: we've just come off the largest loss for the Democratic Party in almost a century. And to be able to put Speaker Pelosi as minority leader is truly, it's unacceptable for our party to move our party forward in a moderate direction. You support Nancy Pelosi for minority leader. Why do you disagree with Mr. Shuler?
Well, you know, for those who are waking up here in Washington, I know they're a little shocked by the Eagles' victory over the Redskins last night. But the last time they played, you know, the Redskins beat the Eagles. The fact of the matter is that Nancy Pelosi has led us from the minority into the majority. We did suffer an election loss on the first Tuesday of November. But I'm convinced, and I think the majority, the overwhelming majority, notwithstanding the press fascination with the leadership fight, Nancy Pelosi is going to win 90+% of the votes in our caucus because she is a very capable leader who's led our caucus. And yes, we suffered an election loss, but that was after tremendous accomplishment in the last session. And we lost, you know, when Social Security was passed, there were losses. When Medicare was passed, there were losses. When the Civil Rights Bill was signed by President Johnson, he said he was consigning his party to losing the South for more than a generation. Sometimes to move the country forward, it does create some unease, and there can be electoral losses, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't move forward.
Yes, but the CNN opinion research poll that was taken right before the election, when it surveyed those that were likely to vote, 70% said that this election was about a rejection of Democratic policies. And so given that, 70%, and only 17% said it's a mandate for Republican policies, but still, going forward with the same leadership, you're not concerned about that?
Well, you know, when the Republicans lost their majority in '06, you didn't see them shake up their ranks. What they did was they got behind Boehner and Cantor. They believed in their position. They now are in the majority. I think that teams have to, and organizations have to be careful as you're moving forward. And if leaders are moving in the right direction, there are going to be setbacks at times. And you can't have major efforts to deal with social injustice in our country, like 30 million people without health insurance, and not create some unease. I mean, there are people who were upset. Health insurance companies were upset. Major Wall Street firms were upset. They spent tens of millions of dollars, a lot of it secretly, on ads. You know, they ran 161,000 ads targeting Nancy Pelosi nationwide. So, you know, her approval numbers might be down a little bit. That doesn't mean that we didn't do the right thing. And, you know, sometimes you have to be prepared to take election losses. There were Democrats who voted for the assault weapons ban under the Clinton administration, who walked on the floor and said, we know we're going to lose our seats. We know that there are going to be people in our districts who, you know, are going to think that this is somehow the slippery slope to people taking all of their guns from them. And they're going to vote us out. But we're going to save thousands of lives in the process. And they cast that vote. Margolis Mazinski, who served in the district next to mine, voted for the Clinton economic plan and said knew she was going to lose her seat. But we got 25 million new jobs. We balanced the budget. I mean, sometimes you have to be prepared to take setbacks in order to move the country forward. Democrats, I'm convinced that we did the right thing. And I think that over time, history will judge the decisions we made in the 111 about saving the economy, investing in American auto manufacturing, about stabilizing regulations on Wall Street so that we wouldn't have a financial crisis again, that those were the correct decisions, even if we suffered electoral losses at the polls.
What do you want the Democratic leaders to do as far as pushing the agenda? Do you want them to push an agenda that is more to the left or a little bit more to the center?
Nobody in this country cares. What they care about is an agenda that's going to put millions of people back to work. They care about an agenda that's going to balance the budget. You know, we have to deal with the question of tax cuts in a few weeks here. And, you know, I'm joining today with Senator Warner, who's saying, look, rather than tax cuts for the wealthy, let's take those tax cuts and make them available to small businesses who are going to create jobs. Over the long term, we need to be investing. Democrats need to be a party focused on growth, smart growth, development of our economy, putting people to work. This discussion about left-right is a Washington discussion. It's not out in the, I've traveled across the country. People are not focused on that. They're focused on jobs. They're focused on how to secure their homes and their futures for their children, how to educate their children.
Well, on the tax cut issue, it sounds like you're willing to you see that as a compromise, what Senator Mark Warner has put out there. What are you hearing about Republican support for that idea?
Well, it would seem to me that what the Republicans have said is, look, let's keep the tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires because they will potentially invest it in business creation and therefore spur economic development. What Senator Warner has said, which is why I joined with him this morning on it, is that let's cut out the middleman. Let's make those tax breaks. Let's take $65 to $70 billion a year over the next 10 years and make a long-term reduction over a decade in small business taxes so that they can develop their companies and put Americans back to work.
If that proposal doesn't go anywhere and the only compromise on the table is extending the tax cuts for everybody for 2 years, would you vote for that?
Well, I don't know. And let me tell you this, that I know you've had a little discussion today about earmarks.
Yeah.
Earmarks about $16 billion. The tax cuts in total is $4 trillion added to our national debt. $4 trillion added to our national debt, which we're going to then borrow from countries around the world and from other investors. And that debt is going to be paid for by our children and our grandchildren. And I'm not so certain that we should just be willy-nilly about this. I think that we do need to continue to spur economic activity in the country. The recovery is not as full-blown as we would want. So I'm not opposed to temporary extension of tax cuts for people 250 and under. But I'm not sure that I'm for a permanent extension of tax cuts for anyone. I think that we need to think long and hard about how we're going to get the country out of debt. We got a debt commission that's laid out $4 trillion in cuts. You got a tax cut proposal that would be $4 trillion in lost expenditures. You take us right back to where we are now. If you implemented both of those, we'd be still at about $12 trillion in debt as a country with $1 trillion plus in deficit each year. You got to think it through, and then we still have to do the appropriation bills for this year. So you really wouldn't be at zero. You'd add another $1 trillion on the spending side. So I think that we have a tendency. It's kind of like the red meat we're offering people right now is earmark reform, as if that's a major item. It's so minor in the scheme of things, but it's a great distraction from the real problem. The real problem is we're running a government in which we want the best military in the world, but we don't want to pay for it. It costs us about $1 million per soldier on the ground in Afghanistan, all costs counted in, a year, right? So we're spending billions a week in Afghanistan, but we don't want to pay for it. It's the first time in history without war bonds or war taxes. So we can't have the best education, the best health care, the best military and not pay for it. Republicans keep saying it's a spending problem. I think it's in part a revenue problem. That is to say that we want more government than we're willing to pay for, and so we're willing to borrow from the Chinese and from others. And I think it's got to stop at some point.
Your colleague in the Senate, Democratic Senator Charles Schumer, of New York, has a proposal as well to extend the tax cuts for those making $1 million and less. What do you think about that idea?
Well, I think it's that's a very good compromise that's being offered. I like Senator Warner's a little bit more, which is because it deals with this question of the recovery. The only way we're really going to get out of debt as a nation is we have to get more. We have millions of Americans on the sidelines who'd rather be in the game contributing, not only paying their own bills, but helping to deal with some of the civic challenges that our country and our society faces. They need jobs. So I like the Warner proposal because I see it as a growth model. I get a friend back home who's a big Democratic supporter, but he said, we have to push more on development. And even though the president's done a lot in terms of smart grid investment and electric battery development, we have to see the economy that's in the future for our nation, and we have to invest in it now. And I think that's small business development. That's where the jobs are. I like the Warner proposal.
All right, Carl, independent in Virginia Beach, Virginia. You're first. Go ahead.
Yes, I want to first say thank you to the representative for his service. I also want to say that as a country, we have got to stop looking at these rich folks when it comes to taxes. We got a lot of people that are out of work. A lot of people are hurting today. They're losing their homes. People don't have health care. And we're talking about cutting taxes for folks that don't even know how much money they have. So much money, they don't know how much money they really have. We've got to start looking at the folks in this country that are really hurting. We have people that can't eat because, they don't have work. They can't buy their medication. We got to do the right thing in this country.
All right, Congressman.
Well, I think that, and I appreciate the call. And, and this is what I think C-SPAN does so well. People need to get more accurate information. We hear a lot of my Republican colleagues talk about the corporate tax rate and that it's high compared to our economic competitors across the world. The truth is that most companies in our country pay no taxes, have no tax liability. Yes, the rate is high, but there's so many exemptions. And the studies by the Joint Economic Committee, the Joint Taxation Committee that are produced each year show that more than 2/3 of these companies pay no taxes at all. So when we hear politicians, sobbing about the corporate tax rate and how bad it is and how it deters, economic activity, it's just nonsense. When we talk about people who are wealthy, 500,000 and above, and Jay Johnston, who used to be he's a Pulitzer Prize winning author, used to write for the New York Times, wrote a book called Perfectly Legal. And it shows that from 500,000 on out towards the billionaires in the country, that they pay little or nothing in actual tax rates. So when Warren Buffett says, look, why is it that my secretary is paying a higher rate of taxes than I'm paying? People need to listen up. I mean, so that when every time you hear politicians, trying to protect the rich from taxes or trying to talk about lowering the corporate rate, you need to ask the real question. What is the effective rate? What are people actually paying? Because we got tens of thousands of pages in the tax code that are designed for no other reason than to allow people to avoid tax liability. And we have a responsibility as a country not just to go, rile people up at some rally somewhere. We need to tell people the truth because that'll give them a better idea about what we might do to have a system which would be fair to everyone.
Brenda is joining us on the Democratic line in Pearland, Texas. Good morning.
Good morning, and good morning, Representative Fada. I have about three things to say real quickly. Now, in regards to you guys communicating to the public, you could do more, but I think you've been very effective. Yes, there are Democrats here in Texas. You've been very effective. Those that don't hear are listening to that other channel. Also, I want to talk about the tax deal. Please do not renege on that. Let the tax expire. Let them stop their welfare because that's what it is for the wealthy. That's their welfare. And thirdly, stop. You guys don't have to keep justifying Pelosi. We love her. We want her. And if you can, I can say this beyond a shadow of a doubt. If the Republicans hate her, then she must be good for our party. So that's all I want to say. Thank you guys, and have a fantastic day.
Congressman Fatah.
Well, I love Texas, and I'm very pleased to hear that she likes our speaker. I think the speaker has done an extraordinary job, and it's the highest-ranking woman ever to rise in our country's government. And this is the first Congress in which the number of women is not going to increase. It's, in fact, going to decrease for the first time in 30 years. We have been, we don't have the kind of representation that we should, but the speaker is a great example of someone who entered politics and has made a tremendous contribution. Let me just say this. I've authored a bill on taxes that would reform our tax code, that would get rid of the income tax and create a fairer tax system and also get us out of debt. Now, that proposal is my proposal. I hope that there'll be other proposals and that we can have a real debate in our country about how we pay our country's bills, how we deal with it fairly. I think it's critically important, and I hope that the majority, you know, the Republicans came in with this contract on America, for America, you know, back in '94, and they said then that they were going to do away with the income tax, that they were going to do a flat tax or a national sales tax. They never brought up a bill for a vote in the House. They controlled the House and for 12 years. So this is what I'm talking about in terms of people being straight with people. There's a lot of talk on the campaign trail, but when it's actually time to do the work, we don't always see it. You know, we hear this talk that for nuclear energy. Well, we haven't built a new nuclear plant in 30 years. Now, President Obama has moved 4 nuclear power plants forward for the first time in 30 years in our country. So I think that, again, people get a lot of misinformation, and then they, unfortunately, sometimes they act on it. We need to make sure that they get accurate information.
Congressman Fatah, the Wall Street Journal editorial says this about House and Senate Republicans agreeing to an earmark moratorium. They call it a victory for the Republicans, saying, should Democrats continue to earmark, the GOP can make a new sport out of identifying their opponents' wasteful projects to the public and forcing votes on them. Are you concerned about this?
I'm not concerned about it in this sense that, you know, the Wall Street Journal and others who comment on this are in a rah-rah state about earmarks. I'm much more concerned. I don't think we should major in the minors. We need to focus on what we're going to do about the $4 trillion in cuts that have been proposed by the Debt Commission. I think they should be applauded for putting forth a vigorous plan. I don't agree with details of it, you know, the notion of freezing combat pay or pay for our military for 3 years. I don't think it's a great idea. You know, there are details you can pick apart. But the fact that they've said to the country, we're in a deep hole, and we need to think about how we're going to get out of this, and it at least force others to come forward with real plans. Now, their plan doesn't even get the country out of debt. This is $4 trillion in cuts that, you know, still doesn't get us close to balancing our budget and out of debt. They just want to get it a little more even. Paul Ryan, my colleague, has got a plan. Doesn't get the country out of debt in the next 25 years. I mean, but it does make some significant adjustments. I don't agree with it, but I think this is what we really ought to be debating. You know, what we're going to do about earmarks. Let me tell you something. There's no legislative body in the country, no council, no state house, no state senate, and it won't happen in the U.S. Congress, where members won't be able to influence what happens in certain projects. Now, whether they influence it in the bill, whether they influence it by communications with the executive branch, but the notion that you're going to have a Congress that's going to be impotent in its ability to impact what's going on is just not true. There may be some changes. You may change the definition, you know, but we'll be here 10 years from now, and it'll be, the Wall Street Journal will be writing an editorial saying, well, the Congress is still somehow influencing how projects get done in this country.
So this is all just a game? Earmarks will continue to exist?
It's a distraction. Okay. It's a purposeful distraction. In many ways, led by the incoming new Republican majority. They want people to focus on earmarks. The truth of the matter is, it wouldn't matter one way or the other in terms of the country's financial circumstances. It doesn't cut spending. And the Congress, those of us in the Congress, will still find ways. Whether they used to didn't put it in the bill. They would call the Secretary of Education up and say, I have this project that I'd like you to consider. And, you know, it still will get done.
Your Democratic colleague in the Senate, Claire McCaskill of Missouri, disagrees with you, saying that it would end the practice of earmarking. It should make a first common-sense critical step in changing the ways of Washington, cutting wasteful spending and proving Washington has gotten the message Americans have delivered.
Well, I don't know that she's disagreeing with me, because I haven't said anything about it in the sense that it's a distraction. That is, that whether they do end it, whether they don't end it, it's not a big deal, in my opinion.
Okay.
Because, again, let's take the real numbers. We're going to spend $4 trillion this year. We're going to have another $1.2 trillion in debt on top of that, right? And earmarks are $16 billion.
Right.
That in the scheme of federal funding, it's, you know, it's a month or so in Afghanistan.